co-director of Honors Presents with Ray, who's the other co-director. Thank you all for being here.
And to begin, we will acknowledge with honor and respect the indigenous nations on whose traditional territories the university now stands and whose historical relationships with the land continue to this day. We also acknowledge the elders past and present, including MSU's current Council of the Elders, and humbly ask for their guidance. The Valley of the Flowers has been and remains a place of learning for Native American peoples who for millennia have passed ways of knowing, being, and doing from one generation to the next. While a land acknowledgement is not enough, it is important social justice and decolonial practice that promotes indigenous visibility and a reminder that we are on settled land.
So I'm going to introduce Bruce Campbell, who is then going to introduce our guest speakers for tonight's Honors Presents. After college, what's next? Bruce Campbell practiced law with the firm Perkins, how do you pronounce yours? Coy? Awesome, thank you. For nearly 40 years. There's so many offices around the world, and it's one of the largest law firms in the Pacific Northwest. He's the chair of a 70-lawyer product liability litigation practice group. And he's litigated many disputes in state and federal courts. He currently serves on MSU's Honors College External Advisory Board, is active in the school's mentor-mentee program, and helps teach a seminar offered once a year on constitutional law. So without further ado, let's welcome Bruce. Thank you.
Thanks, Stephanie. Thanks, Ray. This program had its beginnings, I think about 4 years ago, when Dr. Lee at the Honors College asked a number of us, what is it, if anything, that you think you missed in your college experience? We'd all gone to different colleges, and we scratched our heads about that for a moment, and an answer that was given was, we wish we had an opportunity to see what could happen with our education. What careers are out there for people who are English literature or biology majors that we might be interested in? So it's an attempt to look through the telescope a little bit beyond your 4 years or more here at the university to see what types of jobs and challenges and benefits are out there that might be of interest to you. We went about, and over the last 4 years, every few months, bringing in a variety of speakers, from the mayor of Bozeman to investment bankers to presidents of companies to directors of philanthropic organizations, teachers here at MSU, and they spoke on 4 topics, and our presenters today are going to do the same. The first is a description of their careers. I mean, how did they get from where you are to where they are? And specifically about their position that they have at present. And what are the challenges? What do they do? And the most important part about this is you'll all have a chance to ask them questions. And it's really about your questions that the whole program centers on. The second aspect or topic that they will touch upon is what kind of opportunities exist in their areas of expertise for you guys, for the younger people. And third, if you're interested in what they do and what they talk about, how do you get started? Do you take courses here at school? Do you do internships? Do you do volunteer work, summer jobs? What's a path that is available to you to move on? So our 3 presenters today have extremely diverse career paths. And that's a lot of fun for me because I got a chance to help select these people. And today you're going to hear people who have gone really in very different directions, but all ended up with very successful careers that brought them great rewards. The format that we're going to use, and we have used before, is that each presenter will talk for 15 or 20 minutes on the 4 topics I just mentioned. And then they will leave time for you to ask questions. Our first presenter is right here, Neale. Graham is a wildlife biologist, and he works for the federal government now, the Department of Agriculture in its forestry service. He had worked before that for the state of Montana, and then had a career of 10 or 12 years as a private consultant. So he covers the basis of possible career paths through the private industry and the government practice. And his basic assignment, if I could correctly summarize him, is he looks at projects and determines what the environmental impact is on endangered species, everything from wolverines to sage-grouse. Graham is a Bozeman resident here, went to school, getting his master's degree in wildlife biology from the University of Montana. Second, in a quite different career path, is Bruce Zimmerman here in the blue shirt in the second row. Bruce is a successful writer and a successful writer of not only books, but of television scripts that are used in dramas. He spends most of his time, or has, in Southern California doing this. Most recently, he was the writer and co-executive producer of Criminal Minds, which is a show that many of us, I think, saw and watched. Ran for 9 years on CBS and was very, very successful. Bruce is close to being my neighbor here in Bozeman, and he spends his time here as well as in Los Angeles. Batting cleanup is Fritz Penwell, also here in the second row. He's the president and CEO of High Fashion Garments and High Fashion Silk. Both of these are subsidiaries of an organization run out of China, which is the world's largest distributor of silk products and textile products. Fritz has established fashion programs for many organizations and companies throughout the world, most specifically in the United States, but dealing with wholesalers, manufacturers, retailers, designers to put together the fashions that you see and love in the world. Fritz spends his time, when he's not in China, in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and in New York City. He received his undergraduate degree at Ohio State and master's at Campbell University. So I'm not going to take up any more time, and Graham's agreed to be lead off here, and he'll start on wildlife biology.
All right, well, thanks, Bruce, and thanks for inviting me here today. Funny times, big points to you guys for showing up and masking up and all that stuff. It's, I can only imagine how challenging it is to be, go through a full day. I've been teleworking since March with my job, so I sit at home with the dogs and, stare at the computer all day. But it's, challenging times, but it's great to be here at the school. We just had a nice tour of the building and amazing facility. So really, really neat, and really appreciate being here today. So I'm a wildlife biologist. I usually refer to myself as an ecologist because so much of wildlife is habitat and systems that threaten and endangered species need to be able to survive long term. And I kind of had a circuitous route to get here, and I'd like to talk about that a little bit because my understanding is you guys are mainly freshmen, is that right? Okay. Does anybody know what they want to major in? Yeah? All right, that's good. That's good. It took me a while to kind of figure that out. And if you guys can't hear me, or if I'm yelling too loud, let me know. I haven't used one of these before. So when I was at the point in high school where I was going to go on to college, my dad and mom felt really strongly about a liberal arts education. They felt like that was a very important step in a young person's life to be able to explore the world out there and have the opportunity to study a lot of different things. And when you're an undergrad, you have an ability to do that. As you get further in your education or into a career, you get more and more specialized typically. So now's the time to really explore and really check out a lot of what the university and the world has to offer. So I ended up going to a small liberal arts school in Western North Carolina. And it was a private school, and we had less than 500 students. It was a 4-year school. And about 17% were international students, so it was a really neat mix and people from all over the country. So even though it was very small, it was quite an interesting microcosm of the world there. So through classes that I took and just interests at the time, I ended up with a major in intercultural studies and economics. And, but towards the end of my 4 years, I really had started to be more interested in environmental issues, environmental policy and science. So part of the requirement there at the university or the college was doing a community service project. So you had to do a 50-hour project, and we had quite a bit of leeway to pick what we wanted. And I ended up working at a nature center there that was outside of Asheville, North Carolina. And they just had an amazing, they were really well funded. And they just had an amazing array of captive animals, and there were a lot of animals that were brought in that were injured for various reasons. We actually had a golden eagle there who was from Montana, who'd been shot and couldn't fly anymore. So through that experience, I really was hooked, and I really felt like this is more what I want to explore. But I was at the end of my 4 years, and I thought, well, shoot, am I going to have to sort of re-gear and take a few more years, or what's the best route? So I went to a professor who I greatly valued, and he looked at my transcript and was kind of chuckling and looked up, and he told me that I was probably the most liberal arts student he'd seen come through there because of just my wide array of classes and experiences. So his guidance was just get your degree, get that in hand, don't start over. Get your degree and go out and just do what you want to do. Just find work that you feel is meaningful and challenging, and just go for it. And that'll take you the direction that you need to go. And maybe that'll end up in grad school. Maybe that'll end up, who knows where. But I thought that was really good guidance. So I did that and started to work in a variety of places, and I ended up getting in with the kind of the wolf conservation and research part of the world, and ended up in northern Minnesota working for the Fish and Wildlife Service up there. And one job led to another, and I really just worked with amazing people. This was I'm an old man, so this was back in the early 90s. And in those days, these jobs didn't pay as well as they do now. So, I had to work for not much money and live out of my truck or camp out or whatever. But I was able to work with phenomenal people in incredible places and just learn a ton. So every bit of it was worth it. And if you're willing to eat roadkill and drink cheap beer, you can go really far in the wildlife world. So that kind of took me eventually to graduate school. So I started, I came to Montana to work on the wolf ecology project up in Glacier Park, and that was run through the University of Montana. Go Grizz. So fantastic people there, set me on a really good path, and I ended up getting my master's there from the School of Forestry. And from there, once I had my master's, I mainly worked in wildlife after that. I took a brief detour, which actually is what brought me to Bozeman, and that was starting a paddle sports magazine with a good friend of mine, and we did that for a couple of years and had a lot of great success with that. And that was more skills that I learned that I've applied during my career, but I ended up getting back into wildlife. And after that, I did consulting for about 15 years and worked on a bunch of different projects. But really, my interest had become threatened and endangered species. And so there are certain laws, like the Endangered Species Act is the primary one, that govern how we try to help those species survive. First of all, using science, using knowledge to understand what species become endangered and when, and then what they need to get back from the brink. A lot of science involved in that, a lot of, more and more, there's a lot of engineering, a lot of technology that's involved in wildlife and in habitat management. So I did consulting for a while, and then I worked for the state for a couple of years in Helena, helping to launch the sage grouse program there, which is still going and is the first. We developed the first single species compensatory mitigation program, and that sentence puts a lot of people to sleep. But if you have any interest in it, it's a credit debit market system, which is using the market forces to conserve wildlife while humans, to enable humans to continue to do the things that we want to do. So really interesting program there. But ultimately, that was up in Helena, and my family and I live here, so I ended up getting a job back here with the Forest Service. So that's what I do now. So I'm on what's called the Eastern Montana Nepa strike team, and Nepa is the National Environmental Policy Act, and it's a pretty broad-reaching act. You may have seen it in the news recently. There's some interest in changing it pretty radically, but the purpose of Nepa is to allow individuals, allow citizens to have input into projects that are going to affect their lives or affect resources that people care about or that are listed species. So the intent is really a fabulous one, I think, because it allows people to interact and have a say with what the government's doing and how the government's spending our tax dollars. So I can answer more questions about that if you like. I want to make sure I cover the bases here. I think there's a lot of opportunities today in the field I'm in. The technology development has just been amazing. When I was running around in the woods in northern Minnesota chasing wolves, we would catch them and put radio collars on them. And then you had to use a little handheld antenna and run around in the woods or fly around in a plane and triangulate, and then you have a pretty good idea, more or less, of where they are. The development of GPS has been amazing, and a lot of engineering technology has gone into shrinking, reducing weight, so that technology can be put on smaller and smaller animals without negatively affecting them. I was up in Banff on a trip one time and had some friends up there that were in the wildlife program in the park. And we were sitting down for coffee at the breakfast table, and my buddy Jesse pulled out his laptop and opened it up. And we looked at the real-time location of 15 grizzly bears that were where they were right now and where they'd been the last week. And, had another cup. And so that was incredible. So that's, there's a lot of roles there for helping to develop technology that's less intrusive on the animals and gives us better information. And then taking that information and being able to use it, being able to understand it, manipulate it, process it, analyze it, is a huge opportunity, I think, that's available now that didn't used to be. You guys have some really neat projects going with satellites. Satellites are used in wildlife a lot, and again, back in the Stone Ages, I caught a wolf up near Banff Park and put a radio collar or a satellite collar on her. And I believe the satellite in those days, it was one of the first ones that had time dedicated to wildlife, and I think it was an Argos satellite possibly. But it was really clunky, and so it would download data maybe twice a week or something. It had to come over the horizon and have a clear line of sight, and the animal had to be not in the woods or underground or whatever. So it was kind of crazy, but that particular wolf ended up traveling about 40,000 square miles. And she went down, she was a 3-year-old female, so she came down into Montana, over into Idaho, into the eastern part of Washington, up into BC, and then basically did it again before she ended up in BC and started having puppies and reproducing. But that was just like turning a light on in a dark room, and that was the impetus really for the Yellowstone to Yukon Conservation Group, and that idea of large predators, large carnivores needing a really big area to be able to survive in human pressure. So, again, you know, the satellites have come a long way, and just some really great opportunities there. So, you know, you can work in the private sector, consulting, you know, a lot of different types of entrepreneurial companies out there developing technologies for wildlife study. The government, state or federal, you know, state have a lot of programs. The federal government does as well. There's a lot of differences between those, but really, really good opportunities there. Academia is a wonderful way to be involved and do research and work with other people that are interested, students that are interested in the same thing. And then there's a lot of nonprofits as well that provide opportunities with wildlife and with conservation. And of course, that's, you know, you could work locally with a local group or globally. There's a lot of opportunities there too. I think as far as what to do to prepare, you know, for me it was just following my heart, but at the same time trying to make decisions that I felt like were advancing myself. So I took jobs that may not have been exactly what I wanted to do, but I felt like they would teach me skill sets that were really important, and then I could then use you know, in other ways, and I would develop transferable skills that would be really helpful. So I would just say, you know, summer times are great. I mean, you know, most of us have to make money, but you can get summer jobs where you can, you know, make money and have housing and whatever. There's a bunch of different ways to find out about those. I can talk to folks afterwards if you want. I can give you a couple of websites. But it's really, you know, great networking, and it's pretty easy to find jobs these days. So I would say that, you know, jobs, if you have the ability to volunteer, there's a lot of groups that don't have a lot of money but are doing super good work, and maybe you're in a position where you could volunteer and give them some manpower, woman power, brain power to get some things done. I think, you know, I've talked to folks who've used me as a reference and have asked us the same kind of questions, like, what do I do now? And I think, you know, just being really organized, being professional, being a team player, always have a good sense of humor, and just be a responsible person, you know, be an asset, be a problem solver. And you can go a long way towards your goals if you can provide those kinds of things for people. I think just to finish up, you know, I think it's such a great question. What do I wish I'd known then, or somebody had told me then that I know now? And I think in the sciences, you know, especially wildlife, there's just such a mix of social issues and cultural issues, and the science and the biology and everything. It's just this kind of incredible mix of things. But one of the things that was kind of drummed into my head as a student and as a young professional is you have to be objective. You know, you can't advocate for things. And, you know, working with threatened and endangered species, mostly carnivores, but I also worked with spotted owl and you know, other sort of hot button type species. And we were just told, you know, you just have to be objective. You just, you know, have to be middle of the road, and you can't really advocate. And I just think I don't agree with that anymore. I think that that being an advocate for whatever path you choose, and in wildlife, you know, they can't speak for themselves, so we need to. I just think that there's a duty to do that, and there's a legitimate way to do that. And you want to use science, you want to be objective about the issues, you want to be able to understand, you know, if you make mistakes or whatever, but, you know, bringing the passion and the intellectual strength and your knowledge and skills to advocating for a resource is a really important thing. And now, more than ever, with the challenges with climate change, and, you know, there's a lot of knowledgeable people that say we're in the middle of the 6th major extinction event on the planet due to human impact. we need advocates. We need smart people working hard to try to solve some of these problems. So I think, that's it. I appreciate the time, and if you guys have any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
What would you say your percentages would be for like, how much time you spent in the field outside versus in a building or in desk work, or?
Yeah.
How did that compare across your jobs that you had?
That's a really good question. When I was starting out at yours, it was probably 90% to 10% outdoors, and now it's probably 99% to 1% indoors. As you move up the food chain, you know, you get more responsibilities, you start managing people, you start managing budgets, things like that. Typically there's other people that get to have the fun. But that's just an evolution that's probably true in a lot of careers, I would think. But I try to get out some. I mean, now obviously with COVID, we're not traveling much, but with the job that I have now, we work on individual projects on different districts and that the Forest Service manages. And so there's some travel there, and occasionally some wildlife surveys too, although typically there's other people that are doing that kind of work. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Do you feel that different kinds of licensing for hunting, fishing, that type of thing is beneficial to your work or detrimental to your work? The conservation side.
So I'm not quite sure I understand. Do you mean the act of hunting or that sort of thing, or the way licenses are given out?
No, I mean just the revenue that is generated by sportsmen.
Yeah, like the Pittman-Robertson Act, and yeah, very important. So if you're a hunter or a fisherman and you go buy a license, or if you go buy ammunition, things like that, there's a small percentage that goes to conservation in a state, and so in whatever state that's purchased in, incredibly important. And a lot of people, this came up with sage grouse all the time, as people were saying, well, you're creating this compensatory mitigation system where we have to pay money to develop, but I go out and I see somebody shooting sage grouse. Why on earth are they hunting them when we're having to pay money to try to conserve them? And it's a totally legitimate question. And I would say, with hunting, most endangered species, you can't hunt them. Some that are being managed at the state level, you can, and it just has to be done using science. And Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, for the sage grouse example here, follows populations in districts very closely. So it's really important. I worked in the outdoor industry for a while, and there was an effort to try to get a backpack tax. And the idea was, there's all these people that are out there enjoying the outdoors, enjoying wildlife, and they're not paying in like sportsmen are, like hunters are. There was a lot of pushback on that for various reasons, and that hasn't come to pass. But I do think that it's an important source of revenue, and hunters are an important constituency for conservation. Yes?
Graham, over the last 4 years, I think you're the only person that we've heard from who has spent a significant part of his career in the private sector as a consultant, and then moved to the state, and then moved to the federal government. In a general sort of way, how do you compare the work environments and your need in the private sector to put food on the table, a more predictable paycheck in the federal sector?
Yeah, that's a really good question. The private sector is interesting. A lot of people, a lot of wildlife biologists call consulting the dark side, because because there's a question there of, okay, if we hire a company to help us get our project approved, are they going to be following the science and being objective, or are they going to work on our side and get it through? And I've seen things happen that way. I've seen things happen, seen projects go through with a lot of integrity. I was lucky, I worked for the same company for 15 years, which is really unusual. And it started as a pretty small mom and pop company, and then grew quite a bit while I was there. You know, the challenge with the private sector is, you know, really tight deadlines a lot of times. That's true with a lot of work. I have those now. You know, continuing to bring in work. So there's the marketing part of it, and a lot of natural resource folks aren't good at that, to, you know, put it nicely. They just don't, it's just, brains don't work that way or whatever. But as a consultant, you have to do that. You know, you gotta work with a lot of different agencies. You gotta get up to speed very quickly on projects, and species and regulations and stuff. And those, quite often, those projects are quite short. You might be hired to do one type of document or one type of, get a permit or something. With the state and federal governments, the sage-grouse program was pretty brutal actually, and a lot of deadlines, a lot of stuff. We made the old joke that we were, you know, building the airplane while we were flying it, because we were developing policy as problems came up. But generally, you have more time to work on, you know, on projects over a longer period of time, and you develop more of an institutional knowledge. So I think there's pros and cons to both. You know, the federal government's kind of the same, I think. But, you know, a lot of good resources in government that you don't have in the private sector, but you have a lot of freedoms and agility maybe in the private sector that you don't have in the public sector. So there's trade-offs, definitely. Yeah.
You mentioned quite a bit of work that you've done here in North America, but have you done any bigger projects or just any outside the US, maybe like Africa or Asia or anywhere there?
Retirement. That's where I want to go. I went to Africa in graduate school. We went and went around to 6 different national parks and looked at different research projects and stuff. I've worked in Canada quite a bit, which is another country. But I haven't overseas, but I would love to go. Yeah.
Do you think if you did like go back, or if you had started an environmental science degree, how do you think your career would have gone differently? Like how would the path have differed if you did go back?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I don't know. It might not have been that much different, but I think by doing some of the other things that I did that weren't related to that, I feel like I learned a lot of skills that I could bring to my ultimate career, and also just, you know, had fun doing other kinds of things. But I think that, you know, the benefit probably would have been getting to my career more quickly, maybe, because I took some time off after undergrad, and then you know, I chose to study wolves and moose and woodland caribou for my master's. And as you guys will find out, if you take that path, you know, you want to study a species that you know, you can get a big sample size with in a short period of time, and it doesn't take you forever. So probably would have gotten where I wanted to be sooner, maybe. Yeah.
Thanks, Graham.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Hello, everybody. I will echo Graham's gratitude for coming out and putting all these things on. This has got me a little bit, I never had one of these things on before, although I was thinking while I was sitting there, I could use this with some of the actors I had to work with over the years. It was interesting because 2 of my coworkers on Criminal Minds graduated from this college. And they have many good things to say about the film school. So I don't know how many of you are, I don't think that's one of the strong schools here, but if it is, you know, you can find a pathway to LA. A couple of them are already down there. Excuse me. When you talk about, let me back up. I've known what I wanted to do as a writer my whole life. From the time I was like 3 years old, I knew I wanted to be a novelist. When novel writing didn't really pan out for a long time, I got a little nervous, and turns out it was age 37 that I finally got published. Excuse me, sorry. Dry throat. I ended up in LA at the age of 42, which is not the time to go to LA to be a writer. 42 is the time you start to think about leaving LA as a writer. So, as I told my friend who worked there what my plans were, he said, well, don't do it. Keep writing your novel. You can enjoy it much more than dealing with what I have to deal with here. It's groupthink, it's creativity by committee. You're dealing with prima donna actors all the time. You're going to be a happier but poorer person writing novels. Nevertheless, I did it, and 25 years later, I'm still doing it. So, but there are challenges, and when you talk about excuse me, challenges and opportunities, there are a few things you really need to kind of think about right at the start as to whether you want to even take the first step towards being a writer in Hollywood. One is you have to sort of wrap your brain around the need to relocate to Los Angeles. For me, that was not a problem. I like LA, not from LA, but I find it an interesting town. But for a lot of people, that's sort of a non-starter, but you cannot do television writing outside of LA. You can do feature writing, maybe, but not TV writing. So if you make that decision and you go to LA, you are going to find, I'm afraid, an industry that's very hard to break into. It's hard to get your foot in the door. And I think you could say that's probably true about most businesses. I think it's maybe in any industry, getting a start is the hardest thing you have to deal with. But in LA, it seems to be, I don't know, supersized. It seems there's so many people who want to come in and be writers that you have to start at a very low level. And it's sort of the culture of LA that's been there for a long, long time, of sort of a Horatio Alger, not that anybody would live in Horatio Alger. It's sort of work your way from rock bottom up. And it doesn't really matter what your credentials are, how charming you are, how smart you are. Mike Ovitz, who was at CAA and for probably 10 or 15 years was considered the most powerful man in Hollywood, started in the mailroom. That was the traditional way you work yourself up. Well, writing's the same way. If you didn't go there at age 42 like I did, I was able to kind of leapfrog some of these initial steps that you have to take. For example, my book agent in New York had his film agent already established in LA, so I was able to have an agent waiting for me. Not that he did anything for me, but he was there. And I came sort of as an established writer. So, but that would not be the experience of 95% of the people who want to come and start a career in LA. You would generally just come and be an assistant. That's how you get in. And ideally, an assistant in a writer on an ongoing TV show, something that's current, so you can kind of absorb and see how a writer's room works, see how a TV show is put together, and kind of. And some shows will promote from within. So once you're in, you might be given a freelance. Criminal Minds was like that. They would give the assistants after 3 or 4 years a freelance episode to write. If they did really well, one of them was actually staffed. So that would be the way to start, but it's a very difficult way to start. And the line goes around the block. They have other assistants. You could be an assistant at a talent agency. You could be an assistant at an entertainment law firm, studio, or a network. All of those work because Hollywood is very much a business of relationships and personal connections. And even if you're just working the desk at an answering phones all day. In the course of that day, you're gonna be talking to actors, directors, producers, and they kind of get to know you, and you can start to make inroads that way. But it's 60 hours a week, 70 hours a week, minimum wage, and it's menial work. Okay? That's just the reality of it. You're sort of taking a bullet to be able to fit in and have a way into to advance. I was on a show, a Lifetime show called Army Wives for 3 years. And our writer's assistant there was a guy named Jason, and he was a smart guy, and I can tell you he's a smart guy. He was basically the guy who goes to Starbucks and arranges the bottles on the writer's table and makes sure the food is there, the snacks from the. And when I was talking to him, the year before that, he had graduated at the top of his class at Harvard Law School. But he didn't want to be a lawyer. I'm sure his parents were delighted with him. But he came to make, instead of $10 an hour, going to Chipotle to get lunch for the crew. But that's what you have to do. If the stars all align and you find yourself making the transition from that to being actually on staff and actually starting working in TV, it doesn't get much better. You get paid better, but it's the same long hours. It's the same. It's a very pressure-packed job. I don't over-romanticize the pressure and the stress. I think a neurosurgeon who gets up in obviously somebody's brain probably feels more stress and pressure than the guy who's got to finish his NCIS episode the next day. But it's a different kind of pressure. If you enjoy doing creative work, it's the pressure to keep coming up with something new every week. Because once they kind of pull the trigger on a TV season, like as an example, the last year of Criminal Minds, which was actually season 15, was a 25 episode order. And once the sort of gun goes off to start, it doesn't stop. The production just eats a script every 8 days. And so you're producing like a little mini movie. Our budget per episode was $4.5 million. So it was kind of a big deal. But you just had to keep feeding this machine, and you are expected to make it original and make it creative, make it something nobody ever saw before. You have to deal with all these, which is of course impossible. You get notes on Criminal Minds. I remember I pitched an episode, and the network executive said, well, I think we did something kind of like that in season 3, didn't we? There was a killer like that. We did 324 episodes, so we had 324 serial killers. And you have to try to say, well, that was 180 serial killers ago. A slight similarity is probably going to be okay, but their response usually is, yeah, but could you make it different anyway? So there is a lot of pressure on you as you work, and by the time you get to the end of the season, which is about 10.5 months, your brain can feel a little bit strip-mined. The other challenge, and it might be the hardest one, it certainly wasn't my fault. I used to think about how I could do what I was doing, was the job insecurity. Because I don't think there's any job that's guaranteed in any profession, really. Anything could happen, you could lose your job. But it's sort of baked into the cake with television, right? Just by its definition, you're kind of a hired gun. You're an independent contractor. You get hired on, like I got hired on when I started off, I was on a Disney Channel show. That went 1 season. Boom, you're back. The champagne hadn't even stopped fizzing, and you're out of a job. You have to go right back into the market and line up the next game. And you're always hoping to find a Criminal Minds where you get 7, 8, 9 years on one show. But the reality is you're probably going to be on a show for a year or 2 or less. Sometimes they get canceled right in the middle of it. And then you're back into the mix of trying to figure out, how do I get my next gig? And for some people, I think there's the wear and tear of that, especially when they're thinking about financial security, they have young families. It can be challenging, and you have to sort of have your eyes wide open when you go into the business, because that's just the reality of it. Having said all that, you know, it's still like, if you ask me, I would still say it's the best job in the world. There aren't that many jobs where if you love writing, you get paid to write. And the variety of it, some of the things that were, you know, cons, like you're always going around, somebody was called as carnies with good dental plans. You're always going from place to place to place. That can be detrimental, but it can also be fun. It's, you can be on a CSI New York, and then you're on Desperate Housewives, then you're on then I did a miniseries of sci-fi miniseries doing Ice Asimov novels, so I was in outer space. And you just feel like you've got something new all the time when you're going to the next project. So that's to me a big plus. You also, as you start to climb the producer, you know, you come in as a staff writer, then you're an executive story editor, and then you start to become co-producer, producer, supervisor, producer, co-lead, and all. The higher you climb in that, the more you learn about so many different aspects of how a television program comes together. You'll go to a meeting where you learn how stunt coordinators put together stunts, makeup people, how they make the bruise after the stunt coordinator smacks the guy. The CGI people, the special effects people, the casting. It's really a lot of fun. And by the way, sometimes I've known people who've gone to Hollywood, become writers, and in that process, they discover something they'd rather be doing. I worked with a woman on a show who was, in fairness, sort of a so-so writer. She was okay, but she was nothing special. She didn't really enjoy it that much. And one day in the editing booth, when we were splicing together the episodes she just wrote, I was shocked at how brilliant she was at editing. She just had an instinct for it. She was telling the editor what to do, and she realized she was really meant to be an editor, so that's what she did. So you can, if it's the entertainment industry as a whole, rather than just writing, there are ways to kind of segue off into different specialties. Another thing that was great, especially coming from the world of novel writing, is the size of the audience. I think every writer wants to communicate. Every writer wants to have people hear what they have to say or read what they've written. But in books, the book world is, unless you're Stephen King, it's really not that. I would find myself sometimes driving through a town, and I'd see the library. I just happened to see that they had a library. My books were usually in libraries. And I'd pull over, and I'd go in, and I'd pull the book out, and I'd look in the back, and it'd be like 12 people checked it out. And I was thinking like, wow, 12 people read this. Wonder who they were, wonder what they liked. But it was a very small world. And when you get to TV, even the show that nobody watches still is exponentially larger than that. I ended up writing about 25 episodes of Criminal Minds, and it was estimated that each episode of Criminal Minds was seen globally by about 100 million people in 90 countries. It's just huge. So it's a surreal experience to be sitting in your, little quiet den, banging something out, and you realize in Taiwan and Finland, it's all over the world, and people are hearing what you have to say. It's quite gratifying. And then finally, as a plus, especially if you're thinking about as a career and providing for your family and all that, just knowing the sort of the poverty I went through with novel writing. And I was with HarperCollins, at New York Times Review, all the things were in place for it to be. You're still just always struggling. It's really funny when I get my Social Security, as you get older, you'll get these Social Security statements that list all the years in which you're, and I think from age 18 to 42, I was below the poverty line. When you look at I had a good life because I lived all over the world and cobbled together jobs as I could before I got published, but you're still always playing that, walking on a tightrope with no safety net feeling. You've got one cavity in your 3-year-old's tooth away from being, apocalyptic. So, a great thing about TV, if you get in, is it pays very, very well. Some of that you have to kind of prorate, because you have to also keep into consideration you might have a great 2 years, then you have a year of sitting around waiting for the phone to ring. But in general, it's a well-paying profession with great pension and health and all that kind of stuff. Like, for example, I've mentioned that writer on Criminal Minds who was promoted from being an assistant. Now he was an entry level staff writer. Will start at about $150,000 to $200,000 a year. That's the sort of the opening salary for a TV book, and then it kind of goes up as you climb the producer stairs, and so the head writer, they call him showrunner. It's basically head writer. Typically makes between $2 and $3 million a year. So it's a very good profession if you can get in. I think that's why so many people crowd the doors. The good news is, in terms of opportunities, there's a lot of it. There's more now than there's been in a long time. When I started, there was like ABC, CBS, NBC, Fox, Showtime, HBO, and then maybe 4 or 5 cable networks that did some scripted. Now you've got Netflix, Amazon, Hulu, it's exploded. So I think last year they said there were 500 scripted shows, something like that. And they all have staffs. It might be just 2 or 3 people, but they're hiring. So going to Hollywood now as a writer, the opportunities are really, really good. It's still competitive, it's still difficult. It is especially good right now with diversity. That's huge. If you can bring any kind of gender, ethnicity, it's a smoother path. But, I'm an old, straight, white guy. I'm like 0 for 4 in terms of what qualifies as diversity. But I kind of keep working. So Hollywood's always looking for writers who can write. So just because you don't check those boxes doesn't mean you should throw in the towel, because they're always looking for fresh meat. Also, in this age of COVID, I want to make sure to mention that. COVID is not really, it's affected production. Some shows have been pushed when they were supposed to start shooting. But I think practically every writer's room in LA is functioning now. They're all working even though it's remote. So COVID's not an issue. Going to the thing of what can you do now, if this is something you want to do, it's pretty simple, just write. The nice thing about this is you can start getting the building blocks for an eventual move to LA if that's what you want to do. You should just write as many scripts as you can. I think you'll figure out whether you can write well enough, because you have to be sort of honest. In LA, you find a lot of people who are not totally honest with themselves, maybe a little bit more maybe in the acting world than in the writer's world. Who come in thinking they're going to take the world by storm, it doesn't happen. So you need to make sure that you have the goods and that you enjoy it, because writing can be a very lonely profession, and if you don't enjoy it, you shouldn't be doing it. If you do find you enjoy it, you should probably have 2 things in your back pocket before you go to LA, which is as writing samples. One is like an original, they like to see an original voice, an original feature, an original show, and then they also want you to write an episode of a show that everybody knows that's on TV right now, just because you can call saying like, oh, we want the supernatural. They need to know that you can go to an existing show with existing characters and hit those voices pretty clear, that you're not going to bring in, that person doesn't talk like that. And it's surprising how hard that can be for some people. So if you have those 2 samples, then you're ready to go. And you can take classes, you can, I happen to think that creative writing classes, just as a creative writing class, is not that valuable, because I don't think you can really teach creativity. But TV has a lot of rules that you can learn, like how do you write to a budget, how do you have this bizarre, artificial sort of teaser and 4-act setup, where you're always building these fake big moments, because you're going to commercial all the time. It's not a natural way to write. And, you know, there are things that, there are books like that, Sid Fielding is a good one, that can kind of teach you how to just maneuver the logistics of how a script is put together. And then I think you're ready to go. With that, you can also look for an agent from a distance. So, and if you have those specs, there's nothing to say you can't from here. They don't care if you're a Bozeman or wherever. You say, here's my sample, and if they like it, who knows, you may make a softer landing for yourself if you arrive in LA and you already have someone lined up. And towards that, I think it also doesn't hurt to look at the trade magazines that are online. They're online. The websites, like Variety.com, HollywoodReporter.com, probably the best one is Deadline.com. Just to read them like you read the newspaper, just to familiarize yourself. You don't have to memorize anything, but you can go, okay, this channel's doing this sort of thing now. Well, that executive is now the head of original programming over here. This is being put into production. It just, so when you arrive, all these names aren't just like totally strange. You're kind of a little bit up on what's going on. And they're kind of fun to read, because you get a hint of what's coming around the bend. On the thing you're saying about if I could talk to the old Bruce from when I was this age, I've got kind of two of those, because the real Bruce that I would have something to say about is I think it was my senior year of college. I was at San Francisco State, and won a short story writing contest that was sponsored by Nissan Corporation. And it came with like $1,000 or something. At the time, my bunch was like $50,000. And I took that as an indicator that it was time for me to be a writer. So I dropped out. Again, much to my parents' chagrin. First semester, senior year, and went off to be Ernest Hemingway. And not knowing it was in 15 years and all those Social Security poverty line things before I got my next dollar as a writer. So I would say to that, Bruce, go ahead and get your degree, stay and get it, because there were times when things got really dicey. And I had a wife, 2 small children, and it would have been really nice to have had the option of being like a teacher, or have a backup, a plan B, a backup profession, and I really couldn't, because I dropped out. But if I was to talk to the Bruce who stayed in college, I would have also told him, take a chance anyway, don't fall in love with the safety net, because sometimes I think, it's like they said Cortez when he came with his men to Mexico, he saw they weren't too crazy about the human sacrifice going on, so he burned the ships, or dismantled the ships, so you were committed. You're not sailing home, you're here. And I was always worried that if I had that paper in my back pocket that said, I can go teach English at so-and-so, but I wouldn't have stuck it out for as long as I did. So that was my 2-pronged speech to the two persons. So that's it. Questions?
Questions for Bruce?
I have a question. You mentioned there was like ways you could branch off from being a writer to an editor, and so just curiosity, how do those different worlds, lands of the entertainment industry, how often do they overlap and like touch each other? So as a writer, are you dealing with the production a super amount and with the actors a super amount?
Yes. As you, not so much a staff writer or a story editor, but about the third step up, as soon as you become producer, when you have the producer title, you're the one expected to go put put out fires with actors, for example. You know, if someone's refusing to provide their trailer for whatever reason, Desperate Housewives was beyond, you know, it's like, it was just, you would not believe what would happen. You'd have to go in and sort of referee how to make things work. That's not something you put on a staff writer. But once you do get to the producer level, which it doesn't take very long, once you get staff, if you perform well, in 2 years you should be at a producer level. You touch every part of the production of that show. And that's casting, it's location, it's going on locations, it's talking to the director, you know, tone is the director, you do editing, you do music, you go in and score, you supervise the scoring of it. It's really a lot of fun, and that's where you start to be exposed to, you know, the other things, and you find that you have, like, I never went to hair and makeup meetings, because any contribution I had to hair and makeup was gonna be counterproductive. You know, it just, I don't understand it very, but I would always go to, you know, special effects meetings and art production, how to design things. So, yeah.
Hi, good evening, sir. I have a question. So, how do you think having like a variation in writing, like writing a novel, writing a television show, writing like a reality show, affected your writing style and your writing process?
Well, I found I was able to adapt. Most novels really can't adapt to screenwriting because it's such a different discipline. My very first gig was in television, was to rewrite from page one something that a novelist, a more famous novelist than me, had written. It was based on one of his short stories, and the contract was that he got to write the screenplay. And it was a mess, it was just terrible. Because in a novel, you get to set the stage, you get to paint a whole picture, and they don't want that in the screenplay. The director would paint the picture, you know, the picture you're painting may not be gettable, all that sort of thing. So, I actually had a hard time getting that. And I went, I thought I was gonna be a slam dunk. I had novels, you know, we just blew all our money on novels. We sold more novels than you did. So, I was fortunately able to reach back to this weird project I did 3 years earlier for Burt Reynolds. It was just a cheesy sort of movie he was looking for a writer to write, and he hired me. And I was not that proud of it, and it didn't go anywhere. But I said, well, no, I did this thing for Burt Reynolds, and bam, it was all about them, because somebody showed that I was able to work in that other genre. But you have to teach yourself, I struggled for a while being too wordy, you know, it took me a while to realize you can't have scenes that go on for 2.5 pages, max, maybe 3 pages. You got everything is get in late, come out early.
Thanks, Bruce.
Well, I'm Fritz, and I want to thank you all for at least staying this long. And I want to talk to this side of the room just a little bit to wake them up, because I think there was maybe one question from this side and 6 or 7 from that side, and I don't know if you guys are awake. Here we go. Fashion. So for all of your alpha females in here, and the alpha males in here, who think that the fashion industry may be for a bunch of dilettantes and not real people, I hope maybe I can get your attention. Maybe you will go along with me and change your mind about the fashion industry, because it's probably, arguably, the most exciting, the most glamorous industry there is, and everybody always likes to know something about fashion or thinks they know something about fashion. So here we go, let's talk about fashion. When Bruce asked me if I would talk, I went in on your website. I get in on MSU website, and I'm looking to see what and where I could fit in. So the first thing that jumps out when you go into your website is research. I mean, it's the first big thing on, and it doesn't matter what department, what college it's in, but it's a lot of research, which is, I think it's great. However, you go into the academics in the colleges and the departments, and I see that my esteemed colleagues have got it covered. Boy, I tell you what, there's probably 7 or 8 boom, boom, boom thing that all of a sudden, you know, Grant, man, he could slide right in there, and he's got a lot of people's attention. Same thing with Bruce. You know, you get into the art department and arts and all that, and I'm looking at this thing and I start looking for fashion. You don't find it. I'm trying to think, well, what the hell am I doing here? These two guys have got 99% of all of you are probably here because of the two of them. And I don't blame you. So maybe I can be an ambassador for my industry. But I keep looking around. I go through 4, 5, 6 different pages in your website. And the only thing I can find is arts, maybe some graphic artists, and you know, we have graphic artists in our industry and all that. Now all of a sudden, I don't know how I got to, there is one little page, and it says, this is after 5 pages, it says, the 6th page, design, fashion, textiles. Have any of you ever seen, any of you looked at that and found that? I bet none of you have. I don't know how in the hell I found it, but it's there. So I find this thing, you know, and here's what it says. If I can find it, I tell you, here. You, and this is under graphic design, you get a BFA out of this if you're in that, you know, that's great. Bachelor of Fine Arts. So it says you have the OPOR Unity. That's what it says on your websites. This university, you have the opportunity to work in all of the various fields of creative-based industries. Thank you very much. They dotted all the I's, they didn't cross all the T's. In fact, whoever is a proofreader needs to go back to college and fix your website. It's really very, very funny. So anyway, so I'm looking at the opportunities that go into fashion, textiles, and everything. And what you have in this university, in my area, is you have 3 lectures for a whole year, only 3 lectures. And it's on alternative years, only on the even years. So I'm lucky, it's just 2020. Maybe somebody in this whole place is going to hear a lecture on fashion outside of from me, you know. Can you believe it? Alternate years are going to have 3 lectures on the fashion industry. Nice, I like it. I like it. So I'm looking at this thing and I'm struggling. So what the hell am I going to talk about? So I saw in the graphic design, they had some graduate students and the things that they did. Right, great. And I see junk food clothing. It's on your website. It says junk food clothing. I look up these guys. You know, it's a couple guys that graduated from here and they're screen printing T-shirts, you know, for whatever it is, but it's junk food clothing. I love it. I knew I was home. Junk food clothing, my top. 3 lectures a year, alternate years, junk food. So here I am. I'm gonna tell you something. How you gonna approach all of you and say 99% of you are probably here because of my boys here, and I'm gonna teach you something regardless of vocation, regardless of avocation, that you all need to do. You all need to do, start it today. And what's called is your 30 to 60 second elevator pitch. And I mean, you need to start it today, because it's going to serve you for the rest of your life. It's going to be a marvelous thing. You're going to maybe you go down to LA, you stay at the Ambassador Hotel, or the Beverly Hills Hotel. Or let's say you go to New York, you're at the Mercer, your Standard Hotel, you get to Claridge's in London, the Maurice in Paris, George V. Drop down to Cairo, you're at the Mina House. You go further east, you're in Singapore at the Raffles Hotel, it's a fabulous place. Or you're at the Peninsula in Shanghai or Hong Kong, and you're there on a trade mission with a lot of people like-minded. You're on vacation, or you're, somebody speaking, but it's something you're involved in, and you walk into the bar, or you step on the elevator. So here's what happens. And it's gonna happen to every one of you. Trust me, this is gonna happen to you. So you're at one of these places. I'm trying to get rid of some of this paperwork I have here. And let's say you step into the elevator and give it one of this, "Hi, how you doing? I'm Fritz." And somebody says to you, he says, "Oh, well, I can't see through this very well. Stay with me, okay? Stay with me." And somebody says, "Oh, hi, I'm David Bernhardt. I'm the Secretary of Interior for the United States." You say, "Oh, wow, that's really something." So, I tell you what, I happen to be, I'm Ranger Rick. And Smokey the Bear is really my very good friend. And I know Graham Neale. That starts a conversation, and you're off to the races. Because you don't look like an idiot. You know somebody, you're there. It may be a Wildlife Confederation thing going on. Or you go in, you're sitting at the bar, and there's a couple there next to you, and you're gonna have a drink, and you say, "How's it going?" And somebody says, "I'm fine, by the way, my name's Kelly Marcel, and this is Norman Lear." You say, you may not know who these people are, but you bet he does. And you say, "Wow, that's great. I was just talking to Bruce Zimmerman, about Criminal Minds, and he's got a new deal going and all of that," and you're off to the races with that kind of a conversation. So here's my pitch. My elevator pitch is, I'm Fritz Penwell, President and CEO of High Fashion Silk. We're the largest silk manufacturer in the world. I deal with every known designer that you've ever heard about, with every retailer in the world that's worth their salt. All of the national brands, things that you've always bought, I probably have made, my company has made things for those people. And I could tell you what colors you're going to be wearing. I don't care what it is, in the next 6 months to a year. And you're going to be buying these things, and they're these colors. So that grabs everybody's attention. It really does. Does it get your attention? I mean, am I at you? You understand what I'm saying here? Okay. So, we're gonna go from there into the fashion industry. And you've heard about all the store closings. And I'm going to talk to you about the opportunities in the business. You've got store closings, you've got brands going out of business. The place is shrinking, all because of something that's going on in the world, as you know. So, in the fashion industry, in the garment trade, in the rag trade, that's what we're doing here. And history has found all of you. You guys are watching something, you've been living in a bubble, everything's wonderful, you're surrounded by poets and philosophers, and then all of a sudden, here comes COVID, whap. You know, you end up the next day, you're drinking gin for breakfast, you're starting to miss everybody that you can't stand. But that's what's gonna happen. Now, in our industry, we need you, we really need people, because now this is the ground floor, because the whole industry has changed. And it's gone. What I know, what Galen and Patricia knows, it is absolutely gone. It has to be brought to the fore by brand new blood, things and ideas and people to really do it. So, so anyway, all the glamour, the excitement, it's true. And we need you. So, I want you to try to understand about influencers. I think you all know you could get into, your podcast or whatever the heck you, and you could be influencers. You can do almost anything you want. I was speaking to Tricia last night about friends of ours, a guy named Alex Garfield, and another guy that you probably heard of, Tommy Hilfiger. These guys were in college just like you, going to NYU in New York, and they decide we're going to sell jeans out of the trunk of their car. And that's how these guys started. Tommy Hilfiger started selling jeans NY as a freshman and just built an empire. Ralph Lauren, he had an idea about neckties. And he started selling neckties, same kind of a deal. Calvin Klein and Ralph Lauren both came out of Brooklyn. These guys, they didn't have a formal education in this. They just had an idea and they went for it. So, let's talk about volcanoes, because that's what the fashion industry really is. What's inside of a volcano? Well, you can think it's very important. It's quite combustible. It's very dangerous. And when it blows, you can't keep your eyes off of it. Now you take a sheep, a wolf, in sheep's clothing. And you have approximately the same thing. You think about what's inside is very important. Of course, it's very important. It's extraordinarily dangerous. It's very seductive, and it's got a lot of teeth. So what happens in the fashion industry, all of that is true. Trust me, it's true. But I want to ask you a question. When you walk into a department store, what's the first thing that gets your attention?
Mannequins.
Say it again?
Mannequins.
Mannequins, okay, so on the mannequin, there's really something subliminal that hits you before anything else.
Logos.
Color's the first thing that hits you when you go into a retail store. You get to go, okay, color. All right, now, what's the next thing after you see? Tell me something. You already spoke, didn't you? You asked a question. You're not allowed to do this. How about you? What's the second thing? You see something that's really a color that you like. Now, what about that? What's the second thing?
I would say either logo or style.
Okay, that or the style that's exactly it. The style, the logo, whatever you wish, but you're looking at the color. You're taking a look at what is it, it's in. It's in a style. It's in something that you're interested in. It might be something that you've been there, looking for, and you see the color you really like, you see the style. What's the next thing you do?
I look at the size.
The size. So you're gonna touch it first, though, right?
Yeah.
You have to touch it before you know the size, and that's it. So you get the color. You've got a silhouette that you think is what you want, or a tennis shoe. It doesn't matter what it is. So you got color, you got the style, you touch it, and man, you touch it and it feels like your first time you ever touched your significant other. Wow. You're vibrating, it's great, color's right, it's the right style, it feels great, it's good. Now you look at the last thing. What are you looking at?
Probably the brand.
Price? How much does it cost? I knew you'd get there. So that's the deal. This is what happens in the fashion industry. So what's outside is as important and gets you to the inside of the volcano or of the wolf in sheep's clothing. And that's where you're going with this thing. Now, you got it? Got it? Color, shape, or style, touch it, price. Now you're in the fashion industry. What do you know about that? So, fashion is not dead. Everybody's still wearing clothes. They're buying things. There just happens to be a few less retail outlets to buy them from. And what is everybody buying right now? Because what we know is the haute couture and the bridge fashions and all of these other things. This is what everybody's buying. Okay? Sweatpants forever. That's the deal right now. Now this is great. That you see, you got sweatpants up there, and in here there's another picture somewhere I didn't make, but it's pretty cool. It's a mannequin. One of you said mannequin, which has got sweatpants just piled on top of hers. Here we go again. So we need some of those unicorns, like Donna Karen, any of the designers that you all like, and I don't care whether they're rap stars, I don't care whether they're true designers, it doesn't matter. We need somebody to come up with designs, something that people really want, and get back into fashion, because this is not fashion. This is about color, and it's about comfort, but it's going to end. One of these days, this whole COVID thing is gone, and we're back to reality, and people are going to want to dress up like Bruce in a sport coat, But this is the fashion industry. The fashion industry is nothing but dynamic in its innovation, and it's exciting, and how the hell do we get into it? My colleagues have touched on about, well, let's put it this way. Bruce has summed up the fashion industry too. It's, unless you are a unicorn designer that can take a line and put on a sketch paper to make a beautiful garment,
men's, women's, children, it doesn't matter. You know, if you're that great of a designer, everybody will discover you. They're few and far between, trust me. You've got Council of Fashion Designers of America. 400, and it's a website, I'll give it to you. 477 of the designers that you know, that the generation before you knows, and the generation of my generation knows, that belong to this thing. They're mentors. It's a place you can go to, but you're really going to have to do internships. You're going to, you're just going to have to do it. And some of the internships in the fashion industry will pay you. A lot of them will not pay you. You know, you want to go work at a retail store? Trust me, it's a good spot to start. You let them know, I'm interested in merchandising, I'm interested in, you know, because not everybody can be a designer, and our industry has more jobs. You cannot believe how technical and how far out it gets. And if you were to take a look at Bruce's, the credits that run after a movie or a TV show, a series, and you'll look at it, and if they ever run them slow, and it's boring as hell, but you see all of these names, right? And it scrolls down, and it tells what they do, and you're talking about 100 people, maybe more, right? That's what the fashion is, because you start with a designer who's got an idea. It's got assistant designers. And if I miss anything, tell me. So you have then production people. No, what you have is you have textile people, because you guys have something to do with textile in your website. So there are textile designers. There are people that know what yarn belongs in a specific style, which is totally different than a textile. You have knitted goods and you have fabric. And then you have specialists in those areas. And then you have CAD designers. Anybody here know what a CAD designer is? Okay, you're on, what is it?
Like, it's a computer animation designer.
That's
so
correct. Correct. It's computer assisted design. And a great CAD designer can, let's say they're just in textiles, they map out some kind of a textile, a pattern, and then they push a couple buttons, they change the colors, it just goes on and on and on. It's really a real great place, because what's going to happen here, and then you get in, what's going to happen is a pure designer are going to be very few and far between, because the brick and mortar retail stores have taken a big hit. So there's only X amount of input and product that is going to go to less and less retail, brick and mortar retailers, but online, the Amazons of the world and the rest of them is just picking up and is growing by leaps and bounds. So you're going to have visual merchandising jobs that have become really important. They weren't so important before. They are now, because you guys know all how to use computers, and you can really, really be creative. And you'll learn about putting floor sets on, you do it on the computer. You're going to do away with it. There's a lot of jobs that are going to go away that what they were is they're going to be replaced though by all of you in a different venue. So you got visual merchandising, video content is the king of the deal, and the role of the visual merchandiser. I typed this out, and I can't remember it all. is really a big thing. My glasses are just not working behind this thing. So, fashion weeks and trade shows are also gonna go by ahead. Used to be, you would get the president of a store, his staff, his general merchandise manager, his divisional merchandise manager, their buyers, they'd all jump on a plane and a couple times a year, go over to Paris, go to Milan, go to London, you know, and come back with all these ideas from the designers who put their stuff up. Then they have to turn it over to the merchandiser who says, okay, these designers, this stuff is too far out, it's not commercial, you can't use it. So you have that layer that does it. Then you go to the producers. You have the yarns, you have the textiles, now you're gonna have the pattern makers make the pattern, and you're gonna have to find a place in the world that's gonna make this stuff so that it's the right price and saleable in the United States. Which brings me, I'm gonna just give you something to chew on for a while. The world is going to be run on human resources and on compliance of environmental concerns. Now I'm going to tell you a very simple story. An outfit like Louis Vuitton, I don't know if any of you know what LV is and all that. All right, heretofore they have destroyed $37 million worth of their inventory that's left over every year. They destroy it because they want to keep the integrity of their brand up. They don't discount it, nobody ever sees it, but it ends up at landfills and stuff like this, and it's environmentally incorrect. So that part of our industry is growing by leaps and bounds. If you guys want to get into human rights, you want to get into environmental concerns, we got a place for you. And the laws in each country are different. Import, export, it goes on and on and on. Now, I'm dragging this out. I think I'll hit about the end of it because there's more and more and more layers. The printing and the dyeing and of different things. The machine, you cannot get rid of the sewing machine. We put men on Mars, women in the moon, all that, but we cannot get rid of two hands and a sewing machine in our industry. It's the backbone of our industry. If you ever figure out, other than gluing pieces together and that they last a while, you know, we have a place for them. And it's a very difficult situation because all of you, I am sure, are socially conscious. Here's what happens. I'm in the silk business, so there's no other silk industry, a little bit in Italy, a little bit in Thailand, but by and large, 5,000 years ago, it started in China, and our factories are right in the exact same place where it started 5,000 years ago. It's called sericulture. So, how do you get around the fact that, oh, you may be running sweatshops, you know, and paying nothing to these people and forced labor and all that? Now, this just came up. Much of the cotton that has coming out, particularly of that part of the world, in the last 2 or 3 days, bam, stop, done, finished, because they've been using the Muslim population in one little province up in China, and it's forced labor. It's not allowed to come in. None of the products, anything, are allowed to come in anymore. That's compliance. That's a very interesting area that you might want to look into. But tell me this, and I hope every job we've ever lost comes back to the United States. Every one of them. I hope they do. But you have a population here who will not pay $15, let's say, for a plain t-shirt. You won't do it. You wanna buy 3 for $5, you wanna buy them for $1 a piece, you know, you can do it everywhere, but they're not gonna be made here in the United States. So, it's hypocrisy to a great deal of why the US public, or the US population will not pay the money that it costs to absolutely manufacture here in the United States. My industry chases the labor force all over the world, wherever it is the least expensive, and the reason it's driven is by all of us here, because we don't want to pay the money. I have a t-shirt that was given to me as a gift from somebody in this room. It's an $800 t-shirt. So white t-shirt with magnificent graphics on it, but it's not a graphic. It's hand painted, it's done in Tokyo, which is really one of the great places of our industry right now. Tokyo, I mean, the stuff coming out of there is dumbfounding. I mean, you know, but that was a gift, and that's something that is, you know, there's only 2 or 3 of them in the world. You know, it's a real piece of art and all of that. But if I'm going out and buy a t-shirt, you know, I'm gonna drop down in Malibu, you know, it says, you know, Alice's Restaurant, you know, or Malibu and all that. You know, you go pay $3-4, you know, whatever you can do. So it's a drawback of not manufacturing here in the United States, yet a lot of that stuff is coming back here in the United States. I got a lot of other stuff, but it's just taking too long. I'm boring the hell out of you. What questions? Come on, give me some questions.
I had one. I was wondering, have you seen, so usually I always think of the music industry as a really big influence on fashion and trends. Have you
Way to go.
seen
You
that?
just, you're right. You 100%. And this is very good, because in all of this, tell me what that says. Just that.
Streetwear.
Streetwear.
Yeah.
The biggest thing happening, you hear about athleisure, you hear about all this stuff. The streetwear is where it comes from, came out of Brooklyn, you know, the rappers, gangster rap, this, that, and everything. Sean, Puff Daddy, P. Diddy, Combs, Sean John. These guys, I tell you what, they have put it on the map. It is the biggest thing going at retail. And it has been. And it's been everybody. You take Stussy down in almost in Orange County, surfboard manufacturer. Guy's really brilliant. He had these designs on his surfboard. Bam, all of a sudden he's got 150 some stores that they take the graphics that he did on the surfboard. So all of you in graphic design, and they put them on clothes and they're selling them like mad. It goes with your Yeezys and your Air Jordans, you know, you gotta know how to put it together. But it is a monster business. And I'm glad you brought it up. Any other brilliant, I could give you song and verse here that Patricia gave me on streetwear, and it just goes on, and I got all the references you'll ever wanna know. Let's have some more questions, because I need to have a drink pretty soon. What do you need?
You mentioned the importance of getting internships and stuff if you're looking to get into.
I heard internship. I'm sorry, let me get over here. I can't hear very well.
Sorry.
I've been in this business too long. You can tell by how loud I am.
You talked about how it's really important to get internships when you're looking to get into a field like fashion. Like
Yes.
It's super competitive.
Yeah. You know,
Just like Bruce said, the internship is your entry. you get to know people, get to know names, because our business, you just don't waltz in unless you start at the bottom. It's like anything else. But an internship is great. You go to college and a summer job and you're gonna work for the Kardashians in LA. I'm serious. They have I have some friends that have done their internship with them. And so they meet a lot of people. They meet people in different industries, but you have a name, they know you can use it as a reference, and if you're a freshman, you've got maybe three summers of doing it, and do it in different things. Do it in children's business, do it in women's business, do it in the men's business. But get all of these different areas covered, because this industry is crazy. You don't know where it's going to take you. I'm telling you, I'm 8 decades into this thing, I still don't know what the hell I'm going to do for a living. But that's it. Internship is really the way to go. Go to your local retailer, and I don't know who they are here, but let's say you went to Seattle, you go to the Nordstrom's, you go to New York, you're in the Macy's. You go around and you just send out those notes and say, I'd like to work for you for the summer. And ask your mother or father for money to fund you for the summer, because that's what's going to happen. Some of them will pay, a lot of them won't, but that's your foot in the door, and it is a business of who you know, and it'll give you a shot. And once you get in, you say, God, I'm really interested in merchandising. I don't want to be a designer. Maybe I don't have the talent to be a designer, but I got a great eye, and I could take a designer who puts up all these different things and tries to, and you look at it and you say, you can't sell all that stuff. You got to narrow it down to 4, 5, 8 pieces, and that's what a merchandiser does. Or you say, I want to be the person that does the textiles and picks the yarns and picks the textiles that you do these designs in. And then you go to the production people. This is somebody who says, I want to be the guy, go to the mills, wherever they are. They could be in Pennsylvania, they could be in China, they could be South America. I want to go to these mills because I know that they make the best cotton garments in Peru, bar none, okay? So we're going to make these garments down in Peru, or we're going to make them in silk, or we're going to go to China, or we're going to go to Lake Como and really make something that costs a fortune, but it's going to be gorgeous, it's going to be this, that, and everything. So at production, and then the next person on the food chain, there's a lot of things, besides the sewing machine operators, are going to be the people who take the end product, get it packaged, and then ship it. They're called expediters. And it is a fascinating, you can't imagine unless until you get into it, of playing with, okay, I'm going to get this ocean freighter, and I'm going to have him go from Jakarta over to Abu Dhabi and pick up all of this stuff made out of Egyptian cotton and all that, and bring it across the Atlantic Ocean to New York or Miami and all that, and then we're going to get it to the store, whoever it is. It could be Walmart, it could be to their distribution center, and then it goes out to you and I as the ultimate consumer. There's so many jobs, and there's each one of these categories. I'm really, because there's so many specialists in each one of these little categories, you can't believe it. Like I say, it's like the film credits. There's so many people to get one little thing done. That's what it takes. And you cannot, and you say, how can you make, and I'll give you a fast example. I make hundreds of thousands of pieces of things that cost $1.35 to make. That's pure cost. And the tickets from the retailer that we put on it is $55. Now, there's a lot of reasons, and I'm not picking on the retail, I'm not picking on anybody, I'm just telling you that there is such a disparity for what we will pay for something in this country or anywhere in the world and what it costs to make. And all the steps in between, somebody adds a little something onto it because they've got to touch it and they have to make a living, and it goes on and on and on. Fascinating industry. So, that's it. And what else? Anybody else?
I think at this point we have to cut off questions, I'm so sorry. So let's thank our presenters.
Yep.
And if you
Thank you,
have
Fritz.
questions,